The transit room shook around me as another wave hit the outer barricades. Plates rattled in the ceiling. Plaster drifted from a seam a contractor swore would never move. That wall panel above conduit run Delta had slipped a finger width out of alignment. The column at the south end of the room carried extra load after someone bolted the sensor mast into it. The room had been built for freight and steady crowds, not artillery-scale impacts. Dominion called this site Crater Transit 1. On paper, it was a gate hall and distribution hub feeding an orbital dock. In practice, right now, it was a choke point where my charges and the Marines' rifles barely slowed whatever kept forcing itself through the wound we had punched in the world. The gate field flared and settled in the middle of the hall. We had tightened it down, narrowed the aperture, cut power. The anomaly ignored every attempt. Something on the far side kept feeding material through, and the field stayed open around it like a skin healed wrong around a knife. "Contact at Alpha Corridor," someone called from the barricade. Alpha Corridor was a misnamed mining drift we had widened and braced for heavy cargo traffic. Now it was an ugly throat lined with scrap armor and improvised guns. Bull, my senior Marine, crouched behind the nearest barrier and worked his rifle's action. He watched the corridor, not the gate. He trusted me with the structure, and I trusted him with whatever tried to claw it open. I checked the structural board. Pressure waves ran down the corridor walls as scraps advanced. The main bulkhead at the far end of Alpha was already sealed. They had breached secondary hatches twice during the past day shift, tearing through weld lines with tools grown from their own arms. We had gotten creative with charges after that. "Detonation on your mark," Kova muttered at my shoulder. My demolition tech, young, precise, already halfway through the checklist for the charges we drilled into Alpha's support beams. "Wait until you see loader frames," I told him. "They commit weight. We drop the corridor." "Copy." I knew Alpha intimately. I had been there when they drilled it, when they lined it, when they cut out a whole section of reinforcement because my safety margin offended someone's quarterly projection. I knew where the rock bulged, where the concrete mix ran thin, where the steel mesh tied everything together like a net. Someone shouted. A burst of fire lit Alpha's mouth. A scrap lunged into view, all jointed metal and armor plates. It still wore the shell of the old Dominion cargo loader across its back, but the arms came out in the wrong places. One limb bent in 3 segments, tipped with a rotating tool head that had once been a cutter. It carried a length of structural truss like a sapling. More shapes crowded behind it. "Now," I told Kova. He hit the trigger. For a heartbeat, the corridor held its shape. Then the support beams failed in the order I'd chosen, one after another, and the floor sagged in a long, smooth curve as the rock around it gave way. The loader scrap went first. 2 more followed, along with half a dozen smaller things clinging to the ceiling. Dust and falling rubble took them all. The far end of Alpha tore open entirely, revealing raw crater rock and the black mass of the crater wall beyond. For a fraction of a second, I thought we'd sealed the approach completely. Then the dust cleared, and fresh movement stirred behind the collapse. A scrap we hadn't seen before pushed up to the rubble. It had the height of a loader frame, but instead of tools it carried a cluster of arms ending in clamps and hooks. It studied the fallen truss as if at a work site, then began pulling pieces back into the tunnel behind it. "Good collapse," Bull grunted. "We bought time." "We also gave them a lesson," I answered. He glanced back. "You think they weren't watching before?" "They were watching," I said. "Now they've got an example with Dominion math baked in." Behind the gate field, a corporate seal pulsed on the main screen. The comms officer, a young worker from support, looked over. "Lieutenant McGregor, command for you." Command meant Dominion Central, sitting safe on the other side of a delay chain and a stack of disclaimers. "Route it to Bay 2, I told her. Bay 2 was a side alcove off the transit hall, where engineers usually checked pallets before shipment. Today it was the quietest space within reach. The screen resolved into the sharp features of a man in executive monochrome. The banner at the bottom tagged him as Operations Director Wentworth. His voice came through crisp, despite the interference. Lieutenant Adrian McGregor, Structural Chief for Crater Transit 1. That's me. We have your reports on structural damage and defensive demolition. He glanced at something off-screen. Your team's measures have slowed the incoming hostiles. Good work. Slowed, I answered. They're still coming. We are aware of the ongoing breach. We are also aware of this facility's asset value and Mars's strategic value. Abandonment is off the table. I have a different word for what we're doing right now than abandonment. You're buying us time to fix this, he said. That's exactly what we need from you. I watched him carefully. Operations directors rarely dropped in directly. They sent reports. They sent written instructions. Seeing him in person, even as a bitstream, meant the situation had climbed to a level where the right failure could reach his chair. We fired the gate, I said. We connected to something we didn't understand. Now their scraps treat this facility like a branch line. If you have a fix, I'm listening. We're going to send a transit survey team through the gate. He said it like he was scheduling a cargo run. We need to understand the environment on the far side, characterize the threat, and locate a way to sever or constrain the link at its source. That gate is their route in. Yes. And your plan is to walk through it the other way? Correct. I stared at him. You understand we're barely holding this side. I understand we can't shut down a system we don't understand, he answered. Every attempt to cut power or collapse the aperture has either failed or destabilized the field. If we keep guessing from here, we risk this facility and possibly the entire colony. If we study the conditions on the far side, we might find a targeted solution. Transit Survey will execute that study. You want a survey team, I said. Fine. You have exploration specialists, hazard analysis, biological containment. We want you. He let that hang. You built the load paths for this facility, he went on. You signed off on the original gate hall. You've stabilized tunnels under pressure and improvised load control in multiple deployments. You understand how Dominion sites are designed to fail and how they can be forced to hold beyond spec. You're exactly the person we need reading the far side. You also have a file that lists every time my safety recommendations were trimmed to hit a cost target, I said. Including the extra reinforcement I wanted around the gate hall. That's correct. Those decisions were made above your level. I know where the cuts are, I answered. The structure doesn't care who signed them. It just fails where it's thin. If Crater Transit 1 is lost, Wentworth continued, review boards will look for every line of responsibility. Your name sits on many of those lines, Lieutenant. If you lead this mission and succeed, you become the reason Mars holds. That will be reflected in every record that matters. If you refuse and we lose this facility, you'll find fewer shoulders available for the burden. He didn't need to spell out the rest. I knew how Dominion assigned blame. I had testified in closed hearings where dead workers turned into line items under my name. What exactly is the mission goal? I asked. In words you'll sign. Transit Survey will cross the gate, he replied. You'll characterize the environment, identify structural weak points, and determine whether the connection to Mars can be severed or constrained from the far side. You'll collect any data that can inform containment or, if feasible, exploitation. Containment comes first. Exploitation, I repeated. We won't ignore a phenomenon with this level of potential. Something in my face must have shifted. His voice sharpened. This is the only option that preserves Mars, he finished. You have authority to request a team from the defenders. We'll attach sensor and comm support. Transit Survey deploys as soon as the aperture meets your tolerances. He waited. You don't get many moments where your life splits around a decision and you feel the fault line in real time. This was one. Either I stayed on this side and waited to lose the gate hall and then my career, Or I walked through a tear into a place built from the wrong material and hoped I could still read it as structure. I thought of the rock beyond the crater, silent and indifferent. Of the tunnels I had reinforced that held through quakes they should have failed. Of the ones where I had cut corners because I knew the real stress paths better than the drawings. Of the ones where I'd been overruled. "I'll need specific people," I said. "Marines who can take orders that never appear in their manuals. Technicians who won't freeze when instruments go strange. A demolition specialist I trust with my life." "You have authority to requisition from current assets within the facility," Wentworth answered. "Use it." "What's the time frame?" "The gate field is unstable. You launch within one local day. Sooner is better." "Dominion for now." "I'll put a team together," I told him. "I won't promise you success. Only an attempt." "That's all any plan can have," he replied. "We do, however, record who attempts." The screen blanked. I stood in the quiet of the pallet bay and listened to the facility breathe and shudder. Another gate to sign. Another failure measured in whatever came through it. I went to find Bull. Sergeant Bull leaned against a crate, a thick, compact block of man, armor dulled by old scuffs and fresh scratches. He had run ground security for more Dominion facilities than I'd set foot in. I trusted him because he didn't care about corporate language. He cared about whether his people came back from a corridor. He looked up as I approached. "What now?" "Command wants a transit survey team," I told him. "Onto the far side." He took that in. "Through the gate." "Yes." "Wrong direction." "Agreed." He studied me for a beat. "You already volunteered." "They volunteered me," I answered. "I accepted because if I walk away, they'll pick someone who thinks this is exploration." He snorted. "Who else?" "I need you," I told him. "You know how to move people through confined spaces under pressure. I need cover for demolitions, Bowman from recon, a medic, comms support, anyone you trust who'll keep their head when the walls start to lie." Bull rubbed a thumb over a gouge in his rifle stock. "Bowman's half in love with anomalies," he muttered. "He'll go. Kova will follow you into a crater full of liquid metal if you call it a load path. I've got 3 other Marines who aren't complete idiots. One's on rotation at Alpha now. I can pull them." "Do it," I said. "We cram as much capability as we can through that aperture. Dominion wants a small, mixed unit. Small is the only part I'm willing to give them." "You have a plan yet?" Bull asked. "A bad one," I answered. "On this side, we're guessing blind. On the far side, we might see patterns. I know how Dominion structures marry function to layout. Whatever's out there looks like it's learning from us. I want to watch it at the source." He grunted. "Fine. We walk into the wound. What counts as success? Anything that slows or stops the flow through Mars. If that means we die in there and the gate clamps down behind us, that's still better than letting this spread unchecked." "You're thinking like an engineer," he said. "One asset, one problem. That's how you hold anything together." He pushed off the crate. "I'll get the names," he told me. "You get the techs. We meet at the gate in a few hours and argue about gear." Gear choices were simple because the constraints were brutal. We didn't know the environment on the far side, but we knew 3 things. 1. It had gravity that sometimes treated direction as a suggestion. 2. Scraps could cross while carrying Dominion frames and armor. 3. Whatever it was, it cared deeply about structure. So we packed around that. Armor first. Full personal suits rated for vacuum, pressure swings, and moderate structural impact. Rifles for the Marines, sidearms for the rest. No heavy support weapons, too bulky, too likely to snag. Bowman's recon kit, with mapping nodes to mark and relay positions through weird geometry. A sensor pack tuned to gate fields, even though we already knew it would probably overload. Kova and I spent the longest on the demolitions crate. "If we take too much mass, we risk destabilizing the field," I told him. "They barely narrowed it enough as it is." "If we go light, we're tourists," he answered. "You want to move load paths, you need charges. Shaped charges, mostly, I said. The structure on the other side is built from Dominion elements. That means we can predict how beams and plates will fail. No wide blasts. We're not collapsing caverns. We're knocking out supports. He nodded. I'll pack the toys that cut, not the ones that turn things into mist. We compromised. Enough charges to inflict real damage on an engineered network, but not enough mass to overload the gate. Our medic arrived while we argued. A thin woman in field whites, hair shaved close, eyes with the distant focus of someone who had patched up more bodies than she cared to count. Her tag read, Dr. Bell. Technically a contractor. Dominion liked medics at arm's length for liability. You're Dr. Bell, I said. You're dragging people through an anomaly, she replied. I'm here to collect the pieces. I asked for you because I saw your work in the lower mines, I told her. You don't panic when someone arrives with half of them missing. I panic later, she said. Who else is going? Cover, Demolitions, Bowman, Recon, Sergeant Bull and his Marines, a comms analyst from Central, and me. She glanced at the crate of charges. You know explosives won't solve this, she said. Nothing on Mars gets solved with explosives, I answered. They're just good at changing the questions. She considered that, then shrugged. I'll prep triage packs and a stretcher, she said. Portable enough to move through a gate and whatever follows. No one asked why she volunteered. Maybe her contract had a clause. Maybe she couldn't stand staying behind while we walked into the thing feeding her patients. Maybe she just didn't trust Dominion to tell the truth if no one from medical saw the far side. I didn't ask. I didn't plan to give her time later to regret it. By the time we'd staged everything near the gate, the transit hall looked worse. Barriers had been pushed closer to the field. The scraps outside Alpha had finished sorting the rubble and now ignored that route entirely, focusing on other approaches. We'd seen them rebuild destroyed pathways before. Now they were thinning routes under heavy fire and thickening the ones that led most directly to the gate. They treated our defenses like stress points on a load diagram. Dominion security had cleared a path to the gate itself. The metal deck around it was scarred and dented, but the control pillars stood armored and patched, feeding power into the wound. I watched the field. It shimmered in the air, a column of slightly wrong space anchored by apparatus Dominion had developed after burning through a dozen prototypes. Around the outside, the protective cage meant to confine the field had warped. It looked as if someone had grabbed the frame and twisted, then welded the new shape into place. The field no longer matched its housing. It bulged, pressing against the constraints with something like intent. The comms officer waved us over. Transit window stable, she told me. Narrowed down to a safe band. You have clearance for 50. 50 what? Seconds. Dominion loved numbers that wrapped human risk into neat blocks. I turned to the team. Bull stood in front, rifle ready, helmet clipped to his belt for the moment. His 3 additional Marines waited behind him, broad-shouldered and quiet, with the same hard set to their eyes that said they'd seen bad corridors before. Cover had the demolitions pack strapped to his back. Bowman fussed with his mapping rig, adjusting antennae and lenses. Dr. Bell carried 2 compact medical bags and a collapsible stretcher folded into a frame on her shoulders. The comms analyst, a young man from Central with nervous hands, double-checked his headset and chest unit. I cleared my throat. Transit survey, I began. You know why we're here. Dominion can't afford to lose this facility, and they don't want to admit how little they understand what they did. Our job is to step through, read what we can, and find ways to choke off the flow at the source. I'll read structure. Bull keeps us alive around corners. Bowman maps and records. Cover places charges where I tell him. Dr. Bell keeps whoever she can on their feet. If we do our jobs, Mars has a chance. The comms analyst swore. And us? I looked at him. If we do our jobs, I repeated, Mars has a chance. He nodded. Form up, Bull called. 2 by 2. Helmets sealed once we're on the ramp. Weapons on safe until contact. We stepped onto the metal ramp leading up to the field. I tried not to think about all the things that planned to come down this ramp instead. I settled my helmet, locked it in place, and let the suit run its checks. Status lights winked in my visor. Structural integrity green. Air supply good. Link to Bowman's network established. "McGregor," Bull said from my left. "You with us?" "As much as I'm with anything." He grunted. We reached the threshold. Looking into the field felt like looking into a reflection that moved on its own schedule. The space beyond shifted in subtle ways. Lines that refused to meet cleanly. Surfaces where Dominion's steel mated to rock without any respect for how welds should flow. The ramp ended at the edge of the field. Beyond that, I only had the impression of a corridor continuing. Dominion security had bolted one last armored barrier beside the ramp. It was covered in dents and burn marks. Wentworth's voice came through my ear. "Transit survey, you are go." "Dominion can record this," I answered. "We're stepping through." I took the final step. The world folded. I've been in cave-ins. I've been through decompression events. I've ridden lifts that dropped more stories than they were rated for. None of that felt like this. Every direction stretched and snapped in the time it took to blink. My body felt as if someone had grabbed the vector that defined down, dragged it sideways, then flicked it back. I hit hard surface on my knees. Suit readouts flared, recalibrated, settled. Gravity pulled me toward what my eyes agreed was the floor. Good start. "Status," I said. "Up," Bull answered. "Team, check in." One by one, voices answered. Everyone was alive. A few curses, a groan from the comms analyst as he fumbled with his unit. I got to my feet. We stood in a corridor. At first glance, it could have been any hallway in Crater Transit 1. Same Dominion bulkhead panels, same access hatches, same painted line down the center marking flow direction. The gate field behind us merged seamlessly into the wall we'd just stepped away from, as if it had always been there. Then I looked closer. The floor plates didn't all match. Some bore the ground-in dust and abrasive grit of mine drifts. Others were too clean and reflective, more suited to orbital docks. Between two plates, a seam ran at a slight angle instead of the tight factory fit I knew. The wall on my left carried a maintenance hatch with a hazard stencil I recognized from Mars. The wall on my right held an identical hatch, but the paint scheme around it belonged to a facility I'd only ever seen in internal reports. The corridor felt like a collage of Dominion sites, cut up and reassembled without much care for age or design. "Bowman," I said. "Mapping." "Nodes deploying," he answered. He flicked 3 small devices down the corridor. They scuttled along the floor, clamped to the metal, and began pinging. "Bull," I went on. "Security perimeter, watch for movement." "You don't have to tell me that," he answered. We all knew where the scraps came from now. We were standing on their side of the gate. I checked the field behind us. The aperture glowed faintly against the wall. Its boundary didn't line up exactly with the frame we'd built on Mars. There, the gate sat in a harness of machines we understood. Here, someone had set those machines into a different wall and pulled until they warped to fit. I marked the location on Bowman's map. "This is our insertion point," I said. "Even if we lose sight of it, we know where it started. Assuming the geometry holds together around us." Bowman muttered. "If it doesn't, your job is to notice first." I moved to point. We advanced down the corridor. The first turn looked normal, wide enough for pallets, corners gentled for cargo and personnel. The second turn didn't. The passage jogged sideways into a section from a different facility. The floor sloped slightly, built for a ship's artificial gravity rather than a fixed installation. Overhead plating changed pattern halfway along. A line of graffiti ran along one wall, scratched in by hand. Names, dates, crude symbols. "Those names," Bull murmured behind me. "Some of those are convict tags." Dominion used convict labor on high-risk projects. You could always tell when a site had a prison transport dock attached. The graffiti told me someone had been here long enough to mark the walls. We weren't the first. "Mark it," I told Bowman. "We'll cross-reference with internal records later. If there's a later." He dropped another node. We met our first scraps a little farther on. I felt them in the structure before I saw them. A pattern of impacts through the floor, regular as a machine line tracking down the corridor ahead. "Contact," I murmured. Bull raised a fist. The team stilled. Around the next corner, in a wider section of passage, a column of scraps moved. They were big. Each had the footprint of a cargo loader frame, but where a loader was meant to lift and carry under human control, these had been rebuilt for a different purpose. Metal limbs grew from the frames at odd points, jointed in multiple segments for maximum reach. Some ended in clamps, others in saw teeth, welding heads, piston spikes. Armor plates shielded vulnerable joints. Their torsos were studded with nodes and cables. They carried structure. One had a length of pipe strapped across its back with melted armor. Another bore a segment of truss as if it weighed nothing. A third hauled what looked like a partial room module welded to its spine. They moved in a disciplined line, no scanning, no hunting. They marched as if following a familiar route. We hugged the wall. The first scrap drew level. Where a loader frame's control cabin should have sat, a cluster of optics blinked and refocused. They swept over us, lingered just long enough to register bodies, then drifted back to the path ahead. The scrap adjusted its gait, stepping closer to the opposite wall to give us more space. The rest of the line mirrored the adjustment. None raised a weapon, none lunged. They sidestepped us the way a work crew gives room to inspectors in a busy hallway. I tracked them as they passed. "Incoming hostiles ignoring us," Bull muttered. "You want me to change that?" "Negative," I said. "Let them work. They're our enemy. Right now their main job is moving material. Fighting us comes second. We wait to start a fight until we know the cost." "You're guessing." "I'm reading behavior," I said. "That's why I'm here." He didn't argue. We moved on. The pattern repeated. More corridors spliced from different Dominion sites. Long stretches of mined drift, rough rock only partly lined, grafted onto smooth, sealed passageways from orbital depots. Hatch designs repeated. Same model door with different paint schemes and stages of wear. In one section, gravity slid sideways. One moment my boots hit the floor, the next my weight leaned toward the right wall. Loose gear skated across plates. The comms analyst flailed, sliding toward an open doorway that looked out over a framework of beams and cranes hanging above black distance. Bull grabbed his pack and hauled him back. "Stable?" I called. "Vector's locked again," Kova answered. "Feels like we're walking along a slope." "We are," I said. "The local gravity field points a different way. The structure cares about load paths, not about our comfort." We adjusted. We walked along the wall like on a sloping ramp until gravity tipped back and the floor claimed us again. The farther we went, the louder the patchwork announced itself. We passed through a mess hall that might have been lifted straight from Crater Transit 1. Tables bolted to the floor, serving line along one wall. Chairs scattered as if people had left in a hurry. 2 corridors later, another mess hall. Same layout, but the tables clung to the left wall, bolted there, and ceiling lights sat in what should have been the far wall. Gravity pulled us toward the tables. Cups and trays hugged surfaces obediently. The third mess hall repeated the shape, rotated again. Tables above us, benches overhead, with utensils clipped beneath them. The repetition felt like someone copying layouts from memory, but guessing at how human bodies used them. At a junction beyond the third mess, we found a locker room. I knew it before I saw the nameplates. The layout matched the one I used back on Mars. Benches in the same places. Lockers in the same staggered rows. Even the dent in the far corner where someone had thrown equipment years ago looked right. The names were wrong. Different employees, different divisions. Some logos Dominion had retired before I joined. One locker carried my name. Adrian McGregor, stamped in block capitals. Same three-letter division code as on Mars. Same serial. I opened it. Gear sat on the shelves in my usual arrangement. Boots under the bench, tool roll on the second shelf, data slate in the door rack. The details were off. The boots bore a mining division I'd never served in. The tool roll held instruments from a branch of structural engineering that never moved past prototype while I trained. The slate model was newer than anything issued on Mars. "Sir," Cover murmured behind me. "That locker belongs to someone," I said. "He only shares my name." "It looks like your habits too," he replied. "Mark it, then we move." I closed the door. My hand stayed steady. I made sure they kept it that way. We kept going. We saw more proof that other teams had walked here. Toolkits in corners with designs Dominion had retired years earlier. Data slates wedged into cracks. Screens dark, cases cracked. Walls scratched with names, warnings, arrows pointing nowhere. At one junction, we met ghosts. I use the word for convenience, not belief. We saw people move along an intersecting passage, Dominion armor, rifles, formation. They marched with trained rhythm. "Friendly?" Bull asked. "Hold," I said. We waved, called out. They didn't react. Their movements didn't quite match the space. Feet landed slightly out of alignment with the deck. Helmet lights pointed a fraction off true. They faded in and out as they moved, as if something unseen occluded our view. Then they vanished, leaving a single shell casing on the deck where their path crossed ours. Bull picked it up. "This isn't our ammo," he muttered. The caliber fit a standard rifle, but the casing profile matched a design Dominion still kept on test benches. "Pocket it," I told him. "Evidence later." If we had a later. We'd been inside only part of a shift by my suit clock when Bowman's mapping rig began to misbehave. "McGregor," he called. "You should see this." I moved to his side. His display showed a wireframe map of the corridors we'd walked. Nodes for mapping devices, lines connecting them, an overlay of gate field readings and local gravity. The map was wrong. Corridors folded back over themselves in patterns we hadn't physically walked. Junctions appeared where none existed. Our insertion point appeared twice. "It's drawing more layouts than the ones we used," Bowman muttered, "like overlapping multiple plans." "Are those paths real?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "The nodes see them. My eyes don't." "We stick with surfaces our boots can touch," I said. "The map's a tool, not the truth. If it tells you up is sideways, trust your balance first." He nodded, but his gaze stayed glued to the shifting lines. We rested in a widened alcove near a sealed bulkhead. I let the team cycle suits, check seals, drink water. No one relaxed much. The structure kept moving around us. I felt tiny shifts in the walls like a building breathing. Then the first real skirmish hit. We were crossing a narrow walkway above a shaft when scraps hit us from both ends. Smaller units this time, built on maintenance drone chassis with extra limbs grafted on. They moved along the underside of the walkway as easily as along the top. "Contact! Front and rear!" Bull snapped. "Engage!" Rifles barked. Sparks jumped from metal limbs as rounds punched through. One scrap lost its grip and spiraled into the shaft. Another darted forward, hooks reaching for Dr. Bell's pack. She pivoted, using the stretcher frame as a shield, and the hook snagged that instead. Cover dropped to one knee, braced, and took a clean shot that severed the hooks. The scrap fell away. I moved with the rest, staying low, giving the Marines clear lines of fire. This part belonged to them. A larger scrap, half-loader, half-armored barricade, forced its way onto the walkway behind us, pushing smaller units aside. It lowered its head, exposing a fan of tool arms. "We can't hold this for long," Bull grunted. "Pick a direction." "Forward," I snapped. "Shaft behind us runs deeper. Lose the walkway there and we lose bodies." He nodded once. "Front, punch through." The Marines concentrated fire. The scraps ahead dropped, one after another, pieces spilling off into the dark. We surged forward. One of Bull's men caught a bad hit. A clamp arm closed on his forearm and twisted, tearing the limb clean away. He screamed. Blood sheeted inside his sleeve before Dr. Bell engaged the suit's auto-seal cuff. We pushed hard. The last scrap ahead fell. We shoved past, left the wounded Marine to Dr. Bell and a covering guard, and sprinted for a junction with solid footing. "Fall back!" Bull barked. "Bell, move!" She had the bleeding under control enough that the Marine could walk. He clutched his shoulder. Behind us, the larger scrap reached the narrowest span. It slammed tool heads into the decking. Metal tore. "Run," Kova murmured. We ran. The walkway peeled away behind us like tape stripped from a roll. The shaft swallowed it. Noise chased us, a rolling rumble of broken structure. We hit solid ground. I turned. The scrap stood at the edge of what remained, tools flexing. It could have come after us. Instead, it turned away and began cannibalizing the fallen segments, breaking them into pieces, sorting them. Smaller scraps joined it. Together they fed the pieces into cavities in the wall. The walls accepted the material, closed over it, then moments later extruded new components farther along the shaft. "Is that my arm?" the wounded Marine whispered. One of the sorted pieces was his limb. The scrap held it, studied it, then grafted it into the wall where other metal met. The hand twitched in time with impacts elsewhere, fingers flexing to some distant rhythm. Dr. Bell watched, face flat. "We move," I said. "Staring doesn't give him anything back." We logged the scrap's behavior. Here, nothing went to waste. The structure repurposed everything, living or not, into its load paths. That stuck with me. So did the way the walkway had failed, segment by segment, like someone unzipping a joint. Our first sabotage on this side had been the Alpha collapse. The structure watched, then answered with its own demolition when it needed to change a path. We moved on, following the rough direction where Bowman's map and my instincts agreed. Deeper, toward a central axis. The surrounding corridors began to show stress we hadn't caused, cracks and buckling from shifted loads. We reached a chamber that didn't belong to any facility I knew. The space stretched up and down, walls studded with protruding beams and half-assembled rooms. Platforms slid along guided lines carrying modules toward a central trunk we couldn't see yet. It felt like standing inside a building's skeleton while the outer skin was still missing. We stood on a narrow landing with a view into the void. No railing yet. On the landing lay a broken helmet. I recognized the model, a prototype line of armor. It carried an identification tag with my name. The letters had been engraved, not printed. The tiny Dominion symbol beside them belonged to a division I'd once declined to transfer into. I picked up the helmet. "Another of your lockers?" Bull asked. "It's something's idea of one," I answered. "Mark this." Then we moved toward the trunk. "How do you know where the trunk is?" Bowman asked. I gestured through the gap. "Watch the traffic," I said. "Every platform, every beam, every room module moves along those guides. They all converge. Wherever they meet, that's where we need to be." He peered out. "Transit spine," he murmured. "That's the term," I agreed. "This whole place is one long link. Mars sits at one end." We had our heading. Reaching the spine took the rest of the shift. Along the way, time and geometry blurred. In one corridor, we walked under a row of doors. In the next, identical doors appeared under our feet. Bowman's nodes reported overlap, as if multiple versions of the corridor existed in layered slices, each pulled from different attempts or different times and fused together. We met another team in that region, or what remained. 3 bodies half-merged with a wall, torsos and arms protruding, faces locked in pain mid-flight. Dominion armor pieces fused into the metal. Their suits carried markings identical to ours. Their weapons lay just out of reach on the floor. Kova crouched over the rifles. "This one is mine," he whispered. The weapon matched his down to a custom mark by the stock. His actual rifle still hung from his shoulder. I studied the faces in the wall. None matched mine. The man whose chest armor showed my rank had a different jawline, different hair. "I don't want to know which loop this is," I muttered. "We're alive. They aren't. We use that." We moved on. Near joins between misaligned sections, the structure's attention sharpened. Floors warped under our feet, forcing constant adjustment. Gravity tilted just enough to make us stumble. Scraps flickered at odd angles, then vanished again, as if we glimpsed them through misaligned slices. In one chamber, one of Bull's other Marines, Martin, leaned back against a support strut to catch his breath. We'd been moving too long without real rest. As he settled his weight, the metal under him softened. At first, I thought fatigue had tricked my eyes. Then we watched the strut flow around his armor, rising along his sides, pinning shoulders, locking legs. "Martin!" Bull snapped. "Off the wall! Now!" He tried. The metal had thickened. It held him like concrete poured over a form. "McGregor!" Bull barked. "Options!" I stepped in, scanning the strut. The metal wasn't melting. It was reconfiguring, flowing into a new shape. The structure had felt the load on that support and adjusted, treating Martin as part of its brace. Hairline fractures spidered across the ceiling above, running out from the strut. "If we leave him, he'll suffocate slowly," Kova muttered. "If we cut him out, we might drop the whole beam." "Bell?" I called. She checked Martin's vitals through the suit network. "He's stable for now," she said. "Pain spiking, respiration high. Cut too hard and you'll shear his legs." Martin's eyes darted between us inside his visor. "Don't leave me," he breathed. I weighed the options. We didn't have the gear to shore the structure if we cut the strut. Even if we tried, the chamber might collapse in uncontrolled ways, sealing our route forward and dropping us into a lower level we couldn't climb out of. I could order us to leave him entirely. The structure would harden around him, turn him into another support, another sensor node. I'd already seen what that looked like. I made the only compromise available. "Kova," I said. "Cut enough to free his upper body and head. Leave what already wraps his lower half. He becomes the core of a brace, but he stays alive and conscious as long as possible." "That barely qualifies as living," Bull growled. "It keeps the ceiling up," I answered. Kova set to work. His charges were too blunt, so he switched to a compact cutter, shaving metal layer by layer. The strut shuddered with each cut. The cracks overhead widened a fraction. "Careful," I warned. "Keep that joint within limits or we all go with him." Dr. Bell stood close, watching Martin's vitals and injecting pain control through suit ports. We didn't touch his legs. The structure had already taken everything from the thighs down. Any attempt to cut them free meant cutting through flesh and armor and starting a bleed we couldn't stop. In the end, Martin hung upright, torso and arms protruding from the strut, lower body fused permanently into the support. Sweat slicked his face inside the helmet. "Breathing?" Dr. Bell asked. "Still here," he whispered. "You're holding weight now," I told him. "The structure trusts you. Use that." It was a stupid line. It made him huff a weak, bitter laugh. The chamber had stabilized for now. The cracks had stopped growing. The strut held its load with Martin as its core. We rigged a camera and a monitoring node nearby and moved on. Scraps would come eventually to study the change. I knew that as surely as I knew my own suit seals. They'd learn from our compromise, how much human material a support could use without collapsing, and how to adjust for it. We'd fed them another pattern. The comm network crackled as we left that chamber. Static, then a voice, compressed and warped. "Transit survey. Immediate sabotage. Main transit pathway. Total loss acceptable." The message broke into fragments, then came back stronger. "Priority directive," a different voice announced. "All units in anomaly space are to identify and destroy any primary conduits feeding hostiles into Mars. Mission personnel expendable. Repeat. Expendable." "That isn't Wentworth," Bull muttered. "No," I agreed. "That's someone further up. Or further back." "Timestamp?" Bowman asked. The comms analyst squinted at his unit. "It has one. he said slowly. Or several. One reads as sent before we deployed, another after. That's useless, Bull grunted. It still tells us something, I answered. Dominion is pumping conflicting orders through an unstable link. We're catching fragments from different decisions. Some want data. Some want us to burn everything. Which orders are we following? Bull asked. The ones that give us a chance to do more than die pointlessly, I said. We keep moving toward the spine. Once we see how this place is built, we can choose where to cut. He nodded, mouth tight. We finally reached the spine during the next cycle. Our corridor opened onto a wide platform jutting into a vertical void. From there we could see the central trunk clearly. It rose from far below and vanished above, a column of interlocked modules and conduits. Segments of Dominion gate assemblies jammed into it at intervals, wired together with cables and grown tissue. Platforms and beams slid along guided paths toward it, carrying components. At regular intervals along the trunk, human torsos hung. Dominion armor still encased their chests. Limbs were gone. Heads drooped, mouths pried open. Cables ran from their jaws into the trunk. Muscles moved in sequences, opening and closing as if chewing on unsaid words. Each time a set of jaws cycled through a pattern, scraps at nearby junctions adjusted their tasks. Some slowed, others sped up. Material flow shifted along certain conduits. The torsos worked as gauges, as control nodes, or both. Dominion built all this, Bowman whispered. No, I said. Dominion supplied raw material. This built itself with our help. The spine didn't resemble a lair. It looked like a work site. Everything we had seen, corridors, misaligned rooms, repurposed bodies, fed into one central fabrication line. Look there, Cover murmured. He pointed to a section where multiple gate segments met. One bore markings from Crater Transit 1. Another carried data tags from a test facility I recognized only from rumor. Pieces of gates writ large had been jammed together. So they can route both ways, Bull muttered. Us to them to us, all through here. More than both, I said. Multiple paths. Mars is one connection. Others tie into places we haven't fired yet. Some might come from earlier attempts. We need to cut the route home, he said. Burn it out. If we sever blindly, Bowman replied, we don't know where that energy goes. It could open new paths or widen existing ones. Better that than this steady flow, Bull shot back. Both turned to me. Before I answered, the comlink hissed again. Transit Survey Lead, this is Dominion Command. Priority transmission. Wentworth's voice. I'm here, I said. We've monitored your telemetry, he continued. We see the central structure you've reached. We're issuing new guidance based on modeling. Go ahead. First directive, he said. If you can collapse the spine segment connecting to Mars, you are authorized to do so, accepting that you may not return. I watched the column. My mind ran through the implications. Sever our segment completely, and the structure loses that path. It might reroute, it might fracture. Either way, we'd be stuck here. Second directive, Wentworth continued. If complete collapse proves infeasible, we have an alternate strategy. There are other Dominion properties with lower asset values. One in particular, mining outpost Kappa, matches structurally as a new terminus. It's already written off as a loss due to resource depletion and disciplinary issues among convict laborers. What do you want done with it? I asked. Use demolitions to adjust the load paths, he answered. Redirect the primary connection from Mars through the spine to Kappa. Modeling suggests that would drastically reduce hostile flow into Mars while localizing future activity to the outpost, which is already accounted for as loss. Bull turned sharply. You're dumping this on Kappa, he snapped. Outpost Kappa is already considered unrecoverable, Wentworth replied. Mars is not. How many workers are still assigned to that unrecoverable outpost? Bull asked. There is a minimal contingent, Wentworth said. mostly convict labor nearing the ends of their contracts. Containment remains the priority. Containment, asset valuation, people reduced to variables. Any directive on long-term containment at that outpost? I asked. Research teams will aim to learn from the anomaly there, he answered. Under controlled conditions, it may be possible to develop uses for it. Uses. I could see it. Dominion pouring unwanted material, unwanted people, unwanted records into this thing and letting the scraps process it. Waste management through a hole in reality. You have our orders, Wentworth concluded. You're authorized to exercise discretion in how you achieve them. Dominion will record your results. The link cut. Bull stepped up, visor almost touching mine. We're not doing that, he growled. We're not turning this thing onto a convict crew and calling it containment. You heard the other directive, I answered. If we collapse the spine at our connection, we don't know where the energy goes. It might shatter into branches and open in outposts that haven't been written off, or in the middle of a colony. We can hit it hard enough to snap our line, he insisted. We have charges. We know where to place them. We cut Mars free. We don't know how many backups are wired into that column, I said. We don't know what gets triggered if your cut misses by 10%. You might be right. You might be catastrophically wrong. If you're wrong, we turn Mars into another Kappa, or something worse. He spat a curse. You're really considering handing this off to rocks and prisoners. I'm weighing the least terrible option in a list of bad ones, I answered. I didn't build this thing. I didn't fire the gate. But I'm here now, and I have to choose what load to move. You always talk about loads, he muttered. People aren't beams. I looked at him. Are you ready to roll dice on Mars for a station Dominion has already written off? I asked. Are you willing to stand here while they open an uncontrolled rupture on this side? He stared at the column. Damn you, he whispered. I started damned, I answered. Help me place the charges. He didn't respond. When I turned away, he followed. I didn't tell him part of my choice was selfish. My career ran through load paths in Dominion structures. I'd cut corners sometimes, but I'd always found a way to justify them to myself. This was the same logic scaled up. Move stress from a critical pillar to a sacrificial wall. Protect the main hall, lose a storage room. The storage room was full of people. We divided the work. Bull and his remaining Marines spread along a ring of platforms near our branch into the spine, planting charges on key conduits. Cover worked beside them, spotting joints where a cut would force material to seek a new path. Bowman tuned his sensors to the jaw movements of the torsos. Patterns emerged in the motion, rhythms that matched changes in flow along different routes. These aren't just gauges, he murmured. They're switches. They send demand signals. One pattern pushes more material along conduit alpha. Another pushes it to beta. Can we change those patterns? I asked. Not directly, he answered. They're hardwired. But we might be able to inject noise, or mimic the pattern that pushes flow toward Kappa, if we can isolate it. You think you know which one that is? Maybe, he answered. It's messy. Try, I said. If we can push flow away from Mars and toward the path we want, our charges have less to fight against. He nodded and went back to his data. Dr. Bell stayed near the platform's anchor, watching our vitals. The comms analyst worked beside her, streaming Bowman's readings back to Mars. He looked paler than when we left. His hands trembled. Hold it together, I told him. He glanced up. I'm trying, he whispered. Everyone here is scared, I said. We move anyway. That's the job. If you need to vomit, pick a direction away from the electronics. He managed a cracked laugh. We worked. The scraps noticed. At first they simply altered their routes, stepping wide when they came near us. Then, as more charges appeared, they reacted more directly. A hulking unit with a half-built room module on its back paused by one of Cover's charges. A thin arm unfolded, ending in a tool like a probe. It examined the casing, tapped it, then retracted and moved on. The next scrap in line stopped longer. Its tool arm ended in a cutter. It tried to pry the charge loose. Bull put a round through the cutter. The scrap recoiled, sparking, then shuffled on. After that, new scraps emerged with different tools. Some carried plates over the spots where we preferred to plant charges. Others had hammerhead arms that flattened charges before they latched. "The structure's watching us," Kova muttered. "It's building countermeasures." "Keep moving," I snapped. "We work faster." Bowman waved me over. "I've got something," he said. "Look." He tapped a control. One torso's jaw shifted into a different rhythm. Nearby scraps changed behavior, feeding more material into a particular conduit. "That conduit's signature matches the path flagged as Kappa in Dominion data," he said. "If we can force more flow that way when our charges detonate, the path of least resistance will run straight to that outpost." "You can repeat that?" I asked. "Reliable enough for Dominion," he answered. Bitter joke. I didn't laugh. "Keep at it," I said. "We're going to make this thing pick Kappa as its primary path, whether it likes it or not." He nodded and went back to tuning patterns. The scraps weren't the only problem. The structure itself reacted harder to our cuts. Platforms jerked underfoot. Beams flexed where they should have stayed steady. Our suits picked up stress lines forming in the trunk. We moved along that trunk like ants with explosives. During one placement, a specialized scrap hit us. It emerged from a wall cavity without warning, all cable and hooks. It targeted Bowman as the nearest source of signal disruption. He barely had time to shout before the hooks sank into his suit ports. Cables spooled out, attaching to his chest and limbs. The scrap didn't try to tear him apart. It anchored him to the wall and fed lines into the metal behind him. "Bowman!" I snapped. "Still here," he gasped. "They're reading me. My feeds, my patterns." The wall around him softened, taking his outline. Kova stepped in with his cutter. Bull grabbed his arm. "Careful," Bull snarled. "You cut blind. You might sever arteries or blow his suit." "We can't just walk away," Kova protested. "If we yank those cables out, we risk triggering whatever process they just started," I said. "Check the stress readings." My visor filled with jittering lines. The wall around Bowman shifted. A random cut could destabilize the trunk section. "I'm not leaving him to become part of this thing," Bull snapped. Bowman cut across them. "Do it," he whispered. "Use what I gave you. You've got the patterns. You can push it to Kappa without me. Just go." He understood. Curiosity had carried him here, but now curiosity was the knife against his ribs. I looked at him, pinned like an insect under glass, cables buried in his flesh. I made another ugly choice. "Kova," I said. "Cut enough to keep the cables from punching deeper into his vitals. Don't try to pull him free. We risk turning him to paste and triggering a collapse we can't ride out." "That leaves him in the wall," Kova said. "Yes." We severed a few cables. The scrap adapted, rerouting others. It seemed more interested in Bowman's signal patterns than his body. He went quiet. The cables stopped shifting. His vitals flattened on my display, then sputtered. Brain activity dropped in jagged steps. "Gone," Dr. Bell murmured. "Mark the location," I ordered. "We move. We use his work." I felt like I was standing in a shaft with detonators in both hands and a crew at my back, knowing any misstep would bury all of us. We finished placing the charges. Kova synced detonators and tied them into a central trigger on his wrist, with a delayed sequence to give us a chance to run. "Bowman's pattern's alive," I told him. "Flow's biasing toward Kappa. When the charges blow, the structure has to send the stress somewhere. It'll already be leaning that way." "You're certain?" Kova asked. "I'm certain this is the best theory we own," I answered. We pulled back along a ring of platforms to a point where Bowman's map showed a route toward our insertion gate. Scrap traffic thickened around us. They hurried along paths with extra material, as if they sensed the pending change. "Ready?" Kova murmured. "Do it," I said. He tapped the trigger. The The detonations came in sequence, not as one blast. Charges fired along selected conduits, cutting them in order, forcing load to shift. The spine groaned. Joints failed along the pattern I'd chosen. Material flow along the conduit marked for Mars dropped sharply. Along the path we'd tagged as Kappa, flow spiked. "Flow rerouted," the comms analyst called. "Mars conduit down to a fraction. Outpost Kappa is off the charts." "You did it," Kova breathed. The structure did more than accept the new state. It responded. Fresh conduits extruded from the trunk, branching in directions we hadn't flagged. Some matched the patterns Bowman had been tracing. Others followed fracture lines from our charges. "It's learning from our cuts," I said, using them as a map for new growth. "What does that mean for us?" Bull asked. "It means this anomaly will keep routing around damage as long as it has material," I answered. "We've throttled its access to Mars for now and pushed its focus to Kappa. It'll keep building there." "And Dominion got exactly what they wanted," he growled. "Not exactly," I said. "They'll want to exploit it. We've shown them the cost." He laughed once, harsh. The spine shifted. Platforms bucked. One of the new branches sheared off and fell, taking platforms and scraps with it. Our original return path vanished. "Bowman would call a new route," I said. "He's part of the trunk now." We had one path left that might lead back to the gate. "Move!" I snapped. "We don't have time to argue ethics while the floor rearranges itself." Bull gave me a look I couldn't read fully, then gestured to his surviving Marine. "You heard him. Move!" The way back felt worse than the way in, which takes effort in a place like this. The structure stayed in motion. Entire corridors folded and slid. Platforms shifted onto new tracks. Every passage we'd used felt thinner, as if the place was withdrawing material from routes that no longer interested it. We followed a corridor that had developed a slant, gravity pulling us toward a wall lined with open frames. Through those frames, we glimpsed the spine at different stages of construction, like windows into different project phases. "Telemetry from Mars," the comms analyst called. "Gate activity has dropped. Only occasional hostiles make it through." "We tightened the wound on this side," I answered. "Good. That buys them time to stack more bulkheads." "It also means Dominion will stamp this as success," Bull muttered. "They had that script ready before we left," I said. We turned a corner and almost ran into a scrap. This one looked different. Its frame followed human proportions more closely, built on a skeleton of Dominion armor. Limbs thickened and reinforced, torso broadened. Its head was a smooth dome with a band of optics. Tools folded along its spine. It held a weapon, not ours, not entirely theirs, a hybrid. The core looked like a Dominion rifle, but extra barrels, sensor nodes, and recoil dampers had been grafted on. It looked like a rack of human guns smashed together and rebuilt for efficiency. It raised the weapon. "Down," Bull said. We dropped. Rounds chewed the wall above us. The pattern was tight and disciplined. The scrap didn't guess. It had learned. "The structure's building soldiers now," Kova muttered. Bull rolled to cover, popped up, and returned fire. The scrap shifted along the wall, avoiding his line of sight, moving like a trained operator. We weren't going to win a stand-up fight here. "Suppress," I snapped. "We fall back. We only need to get past it." We poured fire not to kill, but to keep it ducking. It respected physics, even if it had rewritten everything else. We retreated down a side corridor, following the last stable route in Bowman's map. The scrap pursued, but we kept breaking line of sight, forcing it to pick between chasing and guarding the patterns it had harvested. "I'm logging target behavior," the comms analyst murmured. "Dominion will want this." "I know," I answered. "We decide later what we send." We lost one more Marine during that retreat. Mackenzie, one-armed now, moved slower than the rest. He staggered at a bad moment. The scrap's rounds found him square in the chest. He dropped without a sound. We didn't retrieve his body. The weight of that settled like another cut support in my chest. Dr. Bell's eyes met mine. She said nothing. "Keep moving," I said. We were down to Bull, one Marine, Cover, Dr. Bell, the comms analyst, and me. We reached the chamber where Martin hung from the strut. He looked thinner. The metal around his lower half had thickened. His arms sagged. "Still alive?" Dr. Bell asked. He blinked slowly. "Some of me," he whispered. Bull stepped closer. "We can blow the strut," he muttered. "Drop it. At least he dies quickly." "And risk bringing the ceiling down," I answered. "Possibly our route to the gate with it. Possibly all of us." Bull glanced between Martin and me. "We're not killing him for convenience," he growled. "We already killed him for structure," I replied. "Now it's just timing. We mark him. We keep records. That's all we can give." Martin caught a shallow breath. "Go," he murmured, "before it decides it needs me somewhere else." I set a gloved hand on his shoulder. "I'll make sure they know your name," I told him. He smiled faintly. "Names don't hold beams up," he whispered. "No," I said. "Engineers do. You did your part." We left him there, holding up a world that had forgotten what it used to be for. By the time we reached the corridor that led to our gate, the structure had tightened around the path. Walls had thickened. Some doors we'd used earlier were gone, replaced by solid slabs. The gate field ahead flickered at the edge of my visor. It looked smaller, squeezed, as if the physics on this side were choking it. "We have a window," the comms analyst said. "Mars reports gate instability. They can hold a narrow band for a few minutes." "Then we move," Bull said. The last real argument came just before we hit the ramp. We passed an open frame where a new support was growing. Metal had flowed into a rib shape with a human figure at its center. One of the Marines we'd lost earlier, body rigid, armor fused to the brace. His face was frozen mid-shout. Bull stopped. "Enough," he snarled. "We pull what's left of him out. We drop this brace. Charges here, here, and here." He pointed at key joints. "We bring this whole section down." "That section anchors the corridor we need," I said. "You blow it, we cut our only path to the gate. We'll find another." "We don't have the time," I said. "We do this. We miss the window. We stay here. We become part of the structure." "Maybe that's what we deserve," he growled. "We deserve a chance to fight this from the side with more than rifles and a handful of charges," I replied. "We bring back data, a tighter wound, a clear picture of what Dominion will sacrifice." He glared. "You're going to let them turn this into a research project," he said. "You're going to sit in a room and explain how to build better load paths for monsters." "I'm going to sit in a room and make sure they don't test gates beside civilian habs," I answered. "I'm going to bury safeguards in their designs. I'm going to be a problem they can't fire because I'm too useful." "That's your plan." "It's the only one I can live with," I said. He made a sound halfway between a laugh and a curse. "You've already proven you can live with bad structure, Adrian," he murmured. He stepped past the brace without planting charges. That was as close as he came to forgiveness. We hit the ramp at a run. The field churned, edges ragged. Scraps converged in the corridor behind us, tools raised. The soldier scrap appeared at the far end, weapon in hand. "Go, go!" Bull urged. The comms analyst jumped first, vanishing into the field. Dr. Bell followed. The last Marine hesitated, looking back. "Move!" Bull snapped. The Marine stepped through. Cover paused long enough to slap a small charge onto the ramp supports. Petty maybe, but an engineer's spite. I let him. It would rattle the structure here and give Mars a cleaner separation. He disappeared into the field. Bull turned, covering. "You first," he said. "Your security," I answered. "You cover." "You're the one with the big plan," he replied. "You go back and tell them what you saw. They listened to you about structure." He raised his rifle and fired a burst down the corridor. Scraps flinched and adjusted. "I'm not leaving you," I said. "You already left a lot of people," he grunted. "Don't ruin it by getting sentimental now. Move." He was right. I stepped into the field. The world twisted again. I slammed onto Crater Transit 1's deck. The transit hall roared around me. Alarms blared. Bulkheads had shifted, closed in new patterns. The protective cage around the gate stood thicker now, layered with fresh armor. Hands grabbed me and dragged me clear of the ramp. Dr. Bell knelt beside me, checking my seals. The comms analyst sat nearby, helmet off, eyes blown wide. Cover lay on his back, chest heaving. The last Marine crouched with rifle trained on the gate. "Where's Bull?" I asked. The Marine shook his head. "Behind you," he muttered. "He was right behind you." The field flared. For a heartbeat, Bull's shape filled the aperture, gun raised, helmet tilted. Scraps crowded behind him. Then the field snapped down to a narrower band and he vanished. "Close it!" a security officer yelled. Dominion techs crashed against controls. The gate field shrank, brightened, then settled into a dormant shimmer within its housing. Silence followed, if you counted distant gunfire as silence. Fire from the outer corridors had dwindled. No fresh hostiles poured through. Only the faint clatter of cleanup remained as defenders finished the scraps already on this side. Wentworth's voice came over the main channel. "Transit survey," he intoned. "Report." I pushed to my feet. "We reached the central spine," I said. "We identified our conduit. We used demolitions to sever load paths to Mars and redirect primary flow toward mining outpost Kappa per your directive. Hostile traffic into Crater Transit 1 has dropped to a fraction of previous levels." "You achieved redirection," he replied. "And you've returned. Remarkable work, Lieutenant McGregor." "We lost Bowman," I continued. "We lost Martin, Mackenzie, Bull." "Losses were anticipated," he said. "They were people. They'll be honored appropriately. You and your surviving team members will receive hazard compensation and consideration for advancement. More importantly, you've preserved Mars." He spoke like we'd all agreed to the exchange. "Is Outpost Kappa receiving support?" I asked. "Evacuation." A pause. "Due to the rapid escalation of anomaly activity at Kappa," he said. "On-site personnel have been classified as non-recoverable. The outpost is under containment protocol. Data from that site will inform future decisions." Meaning, they had written Kappa off entirely. They watched it, learned from it, turned it into a test bed. "You've done Dominion and humanity a great service, Lieutenant," Wentworth concluded. "We'll be in touch regarding debrief and new assignments." The link cut. Dr. Bell looked at me. "Get used to that," she murmured. "They'll call this a clean win." "There's nothing clean in it," she shrugged. "They don't have that column on their forms." They gave me a new office. It sat in a secured wing of a Dominion complex overlooking the Crater Transit 1 gate hall. From my window, I could see the heavy bulkheads wrapped around the gate chamber, layer after layer of armor and reinforcement. I had designed half of those bulkheads myself after we returned. The title on my door read, "Senior Structural Risk Consultant." It meant most of my days went into rooms with other engineers, security analysts and executives, reviewing plans for new gate experiments, containment structures, and disposal facilities. Dominion kept the gate program alive, of course. There was too much potential in moving material instantaneously between distant points. They had, however, adjusted their risk models. That part was mine. I buried constraints in the designs, no new gates within a specified distance of civilian habitats. Redundant bulkheads in all transit halls with independent power. Hard limits on aperture width before automatic failsafes slammed down. I wrote those limits in the language Dominion respected. Asset protection, long-term profit, liability mitigation. People in suits who had never stepped into anomaly space read my reports and nodded because my cautions saved them, projected credit losses in worst-case models. Sometimes one of them pushed back. "Do we really need this level of reinforcement?" an executive would ask, tapping a projection. "The cost is non-trivial." In an uncontrolled anomaly spread, these reinforcements channel damage into predefined corridors, I'd answer. They cut knock-on losses by a factor of 3. You can pay the steel cost now or settlements later. They understood that. I didn't mention Martin when I argued support thickness. I didn't say Bowman's name when I discussed signal isolation. I stayed quiet about Bull's last stand when I specified fallback routes. Their names lived in a different ledger. Dominion kept a tight lid on Outpost Kappa. We had live feeds, but access was restricted. My new title came with enough clearance to see them. What I saw kept me up on some nights. The outpost had become a mirror of the place beyond Mars. Corridors spliced from different Dominion layouts. Bodies in walls. A scaled-down spine rose from the center, feeding segments of the original anomaly into new structures. Convicts who survived the initial surge served as material now. Some hung as torsos along the new trunk, jaws wired, muscles moving in demand patterns. Others were sealed entirely into supports. Scraps patrolled Kappa with the same purposeful focus we'd seen before. Some carried scrap from ship graveyards Dominion had towed in. Others hauled containers that held shapes curled and shaking. The data stream from Kappa passed through my office every shift. Dominion called it a containment and research site. They talked about learning to shape the anomaly, about feeding it particular patterns of material to coax desirable responses. They were building tools in there. I watched the designs. The scraps evolved. Each new generation looked more efficient, better at moving material along branching paths. They had begun incorporating pieces of Dominion automation tech we hadn't installed. Designs that existed only in simulation files now walked in metal and tissue, as if the structure had started reading our thoughts. "We believe the anomaly is sampling our networks," one researcher said during a briefing. "It observes stored designs and integrates them." "Then stop giving it data," I answered. "We can limit what touches Kappa," she said. "We can't isolate it from every system. Our infrastructure is too interconnected." Most days these meetings felt like trying to hold back a rock slide with a clipboard. I stayed anyway. I stayed because if I left, someone else would sit in this chair. Someone who'd never stood on a platform watching Bowman become part of a wall. Someone who hadn't listened to Martin breathe through gritted teeth as his body turned into a strut. I stayed because I knew how to hide resistance inside compliance. When Dominion proposed a new gate near a prison complex, I pointed to structural instabilities in the local rock. They didn't want to risk a collapse, so they shifted the project to a less fragile site farther from people. When they suggested opening multiple small gates from Kappa to other facilities to study distributed anomaly behavior, I built simulations that showcased catastrophic network effects. I didn't lie. I just made sure the ugliest scenarios sat in bold at the top of the slides. They shelved that plan. I lost other fights. One day, Wentworth came to my office in person. He looked tired. Executives who lived through big disasters often did once you got close enough to see past the corporate filters. "We have a proposal," he said, dropping a file on my desk. "We want your input." I opened it. It detailed a new gate concept. Instead of one large connection between two major nodes, it called for multiple small gates from Dominion facilities to a set of designated sacrifice sites, like Kappa. Each gate would carry built-in redirection protocols based on the model we'd used in the spine. They were turning my compromise into standard practice. "Multiple contained wounds instead of a single large one," Wentworth said. "If anything goes wrong on a primary link, traffic redirects to a disposal site already accounted for as loss. This should address investor concerns about another Mars-level breach." "Sacrifice sites," I repeated. "Mostly decommissioned mining outposts," he said. "Minimal staff, some convict labor. We'll reduce human presence." We both knew what minimal meant. "It means acceptable," he added when I didn't answer. He leaned forward. "I need your structural expertise," he said. "You've seen this thing up close. You know how it learns. Help us build gates that survive contact." I thought of Bull and his refusal to hand this thing to Kappa. His last look before he shoved me through the gate. I thought of Martin, fused into a support, bearing weight he never volunteered for. Of Bowman, whose patterns still lived in the way the anomaly reconfigured itself, every new branch a tribute to his curiosity. I thought of convicts on Kappa. Most had only ever known Mars as a sky over their shift. I also thought of millions on Mars who walked under one gravity because someone built the paths correctly. Wentworth watched me. "You're not responsible for Dominion's ethics," he said quietly. "You're responsible for making sure our structures hold. That's the work you're good at. Do that." He was wrong about the first part. He was right about the second. I nodded. "I'll need time," I said. "This isn't a simple design." "Take what you require," he replied, "within reason." He left. I sat with the file open on my terminal and a blank objection form beside it. I could file a protest. I could write that the anomaly remained too unpredictable, that using it as a disposal pipeline risked escalation. I could quote moral codes, regulations, all the things that mattered to people outside Dominion's spreadsheets. It wouldn't stop the program. It would get me fired, maybe blacklisted. Another engineer would take my place, one who saw sacrifice sites as an elegant solution. I closed the objection form. I opened the design document. I wrote in safeguards. I insisted on stricter gate limits, thicker bulkheads, aggressive auto-sever protocols whenever anomalies behaved outside certain bounds. I pushed for hardened isolation around every sacrifice site, so at least the damage stayed where Dominion meant it to stay. I made the system safer, in the narrow technical sense. I also made it possible. When I finished, I signed my name at the bottom. Adrian McGregor, the same letters the anomaly had carved on lockers and helmets that weren't mine. Later, I stood in the observation room overlooking the Crater Gate Hall. Below, maintenance crews in pressure suits worked around the sealed gate chamber, tightening bolts, welding plates. They followed specifications I'd written. The bulkheads wrapped around the chamber like a bunker around an infected wound, layers of metal and concrete any structural engineer would admire. On one wall, a monitor streamed live data from Outpost Kappa. The spine there had grown. New branches reached towards sensors and storage tanks Dominion had installed. Scraps swarmed along those branches, moving like my drawings for high-capacity transit tunnels. One section of the spine had a familiar shape. It matched a stress relief pattern I'd once used to stabilize a mine drift under shifting load. I'd shared that design in an internal paper years ago. Now it lived here, half meat, half steel, carrying torsos and conduits. The anomaly didn't just learn from the beams and bodies we fed it. It learned from us, from our designs, our habits, our shortcuts. We'd taught it how to build better. The feed logged my reaction as a simple acknowledgement. I turned away from the glass. More plans waited for review. More gates to constrain. More edges to blunt. Dominion had punched a hole into a constructed dimension that harvested our structures and our people, and built something new out of them. I had stepped through that hole, made choices, and handed it a path toward Kappa. Now I was one of the people teaching it what to do next. I could dress that up as mitigation, management, containment. In the end, I was still doing the only work I'd ever known. I moved load from one failing beam to another and prayed the ceiling held long enough for someone else to solve the problem. If anyone ever did. Until then, I'd keep signing my name on the lines where the worst failures landed. The anomaly would keep learning, and somewhere in the layers of metal and meat beyond every gate, there would always be a place ready to fit an engineer like me.